This to me is going to be one of the most exciting talks that we've had here at Campaign for Liberty. And it's a talk that could divide us. It's a talk about foreign policy and about how does the founders of our country view our country, and how would we react to foreign governments, and how would we interact with foreign governments, what would our policy be. And we not only have Scott Long, who's done a lot of research on this. By the way, he's the chairman of the Republican Central Committee. He's not here in that capacity, he's just here as himself, but he's here, and he also has a very, very special guest, and that's Adam Patterson, right? Did I get that right? Adam Patterson, yeah, he's a decorated Army Ranger, Special Operations Forces in Iraq. Special Operations decorated Army Ranger from Iraq, a veteran of Iraq. And so, even before he comes up, I just want to thank him for being here. I'd like you to open your minds and see what's happening with our government, what's happening with our military, what's happening with our foreign policy, and just see how that really is impacting our country, see how that's impacting our budget, what's going on with our country, and just take a real hard look at some of these issues. And I just really thank Scott for bringing them to us. Lights, Vicki.
So by the time Eisenhower is president, there is a huge new flow of cash into defense industries.
He was the first to acknowledge that a permanent military establishment would be required during this period, but that unless we could find some kind of breakthrough, that in fact it would end up creating a terrible cost.
The cost of one modern heavy bomber is this: a modern brick school in more than 30 cities.
It is 2 electric power plants, each serving a town of 60,000 population. It is 2 fine, fully equipped hospitals.
We pay for a single fighter plane with 500,000 bushels of wheat.
We pay for a single destroyer with new homes that could have housed more than 8,000 people.
This is not a way of life at all, in any true sense. Under the cloud of threatening war, it is humanity hanging from a cross of iron.
My father, as president, had strong guiding principles. He used to say, modern weapons take food from the hungry and shelter from the homeless. And so he was fighting with the Pentagon all the time for asking for too much, and Congress for giving it to him.
I don't think we should pay 1 cent for defense more than we have to.
Well, Eisenhower saw us starting to build program after program that was just out of control. And his own ability to shape national security policy was being hemmed in by these forces he couldn't control, and he was the president.
On at least one occasion, Eisenhower was heard to say by those in the room, "God help this country when somebody sits at this desk who doesn't know as much about the military as I do."
My fellow Americans, this evening I come to you with a message of leave-taking and farewell, and to share a few final thoughts with you, my countrymen. We have been compelled to create a permanent armaments industry of vast proportions. 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist.
You have to realize this is one of the great presidents, great military leaders, on his way out the door. And at the end of his second term, he says, by the way, watch out for the military-industrial complex.
People know that he invented the phrase military-industrial complex, but very rarely do you see the whole thing and realize how utterly strident his warning was. I think it's one of the most profound statements ever made by an American president.
We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes.
Yep.
Those are very prophetic words. I should say that President Eisenhower also added that, quote, "We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals so that security and liberty may prosper together." What I'm about to say are my views and my views alone. What I'm about to say is difficult, and it may be uncomfortable for some people in this room, but these are things that we have to start thinking about as a country. I'm a small R Republican, and I'm an admitted reformed neocon. I'm also a registered lifelong Republican, and the very first vote that I ever made when I turned 18 years old was for Ronald Reagan in the 1976 Ohio primary. I came to the view that I will describe through research and study. I'm a student of history. You know, they say that the first step in correcting a problem is to admit that you have one. One of America's biggest problems at this point in our history is that we are addicted to empire. It is often instructive to have a visual image to crystallize the idea in the mind. And here we have a well-known empire, the British Empire, upon which it is said that the sun never set. In the next slide you will see what we could call the American Empire. Do you note the strong resemblance? It is clear that America has inherited the mantle of the British Empire since the end of World War II. What you see right here is military bases worldwide as of 2003. In the next slide you will see that when you count countries where U.S. troops are present as advisors and or observers, then the map looks like this. Now some statistics will be instructive. We're the greatest producer and exporter of arms on this planet. We spend more on our armed forces than any other nation while going deeply in debt to do so. We station over 500,000 troops, spies, contractors, dependents, etc. in more than 737 bases in more than 130 countries around this planet. Defense spending is at historic highs. We're currently spending 35% more than we did 10 years ago. The fiscal year 2012 baseline budget request for the Department of Defense is $703 billion. That is $703,000 million. And that's just the DoD. Adjusting for inflation, the level of proposed funding in the baseline defense budget for 2012 is at the highest level since World War II, surpassing the Cold War peak of $531 billion, which is in 2012 fiscal year dollars, which was reached in 1985. The Department of Homeland Security budget is $57 billion for 2012. The CIA budget is $55 billion. We get so used to hearing billions and trillions of dollars that we don't really have a concept and are able to wrap our minds around how much money this really is. $55 billion, that's $55,000 million. That's 55,000 buckets of $1 million. Think about that for a second. The United States in 2010 spent more on defense than the next 21 countries combined, as you can see by this chart. The United States, this is 2010 numbers. I had 2012 numbers before. But you'll see in the chart that the United States in 2010 was spending $698 billion, or 4.7% of our GDP. The next closest country is the People's Republic of China at $114 billion, or 2.2% of their GDP. We lament, and if you go on down, you can see France is number 3 at $61 billion, and it drops off dramatically from there. If you add up all of the nations on this page, from number 2 to number 21, they do not exceed what we spend in 1 year. We lament that we don't make things and that our manufacturing base has disappeared and that China is overtaking us economically. The above chart shows why. Production of finished and consumer goods has moved offshore, and the finished goods that are produced here are materials of war. Finished goods that are for export are materials of war. We dominate the global arms trade with 70% of the business. Italy is number 2, and they're far back behind us. It should be noted that most of this weaponry is sold to third world dictators who brutalize their citizens. Empires fail because they can no longer meet the needs of their people. The empire expands beyond the ability to defend itself. Mercenaries are required to fight on the frontiers, and we see this with military contractors and foreign allied militaries. And they spend money that they don't have to preserve the empire. They debase the currency. The Romans reduced the amount of gold and silver that they put in their coins. We went off the gold standard and we print money to pay for the maintenance of empire. The barbarians on the frontiers attack. Revolts among the subjects of the empire appear to oppose their occupation. And enemies are created and bred in circuses like the gladiatorial contest of ancient Rome. And in modern American culture, we have the NFL, American Idol, and Survivor. And these are provided to distract the people. The Republic is about gone because of an irresponsible Congress, bypassed by a military-industrial complex. And remember, this is a Republican term. This is Eisenhower's term. This isn't made up by liberals. And the pervasive dominance of those interests. It should be carefully evaluated and not dismissed by name-calling as so often happens. No president has asserted so many excess powers via extreme secrecy, the curtailing of civil rights, creative legal fatwas, signing statements, and snubbing Congress as President Obama and President Bush before him. Unlimited war by presidential fiat, that is, putting the ruler above the law, is the very definition of dictatorship and empire. President Obama has recently, not recently, but last year, has claimed the imperial right of the president to kill Americans without charge or trial, and to do so anywhere in the world. And this just happened recently with Mr. Alaki.
And his son.
And his son. And his 2 sons. Now, I have no sympathy for this guy at all. Absolutely zero, none. But even Charles Manson got a trial. Hermann Goering got a trial. He was charged, he was tried, and he was executed. He didn't have a missile flying through his building. And this could be any one of us. This is a political event. You could have someone declare any one of us to be a threat, and then it's open season for anybody in this room, as long as the president deems that you are a threat. The slow creep of corporatism, combined with a massive investment in state violence, has led us so far from the founding principles that our founders would not recognize this nation today. We live in a society, a surveillance society, that is made easy by the Patriot Act. If you look at the next slide, you will see, we'll have to scroll down through this, but the United States has been at war for over a century. The American Empire began in 1898 with the Spanish-American War. America, as a little bit of background, had been trying to purchase Cuba from Spain since the administration of President Polk, which was during the Mexican-American War, with repeated overtures from Franklin Pierce and President Grant. The Cuban conflict with Spain was hurting U.S. business interests in shipping, sugar, and fruit production. These interests pressed President McKinley to end the conflict to restore business. The sinking of the USS Maine provided the perfect excuse for war. It should be noted that in 1974, an investigation by U.S. Admiral Hyman Rickover revealed that the Maine actually sank due to an internal explosion from a fire that started in the coal bunkers that were used to fuel the Maine, and it exploded the powder magazine, which was adjacent to the coal bunker. It didn't happen because of a Spanish mine, but William Randolph Hearst whipped up the war frenzy to sell papers and to take the U.S. to war and capture the prize, which was Spain's most prosperous province, Cuba, along with Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. Now, if you look at this list, you'll notice that there are wars on this list that probably none of us have ever heard of. The Philippine War, which happened right after the Spanish-American War ended. The Philippine people did not react well to being told that they were subjects of America after Spain had been defeated. And the United States conducted a war to stop the insurrection that lasted from 1898 until 1913. When we go on down this list, we occupied Haiti from 1915 to 1934, the Boxer Rebellion, World War I. We occupied Nicaragua a couple of different times. The Korean War, we know about, and various other ones. So, if you go down this list, the United States has been at war for most of the past 120 years. What does this cause? This causes intervention and blowback. From this chart, you can see that, we even have many of these wars where there was no declaration of war. You have Korea, that was the first UN intervention. You have Iraq War I, Bosnian War, Kosovo War, Iraq War II. These have all been U.S.-sanctioned wars where the U.S. did most of the fighting. And you can see that in most of these wars that there was no U.S. national security interest at stake, especially when you consider Bosnia, Kosovo, Libya, to name a few. So the result of this militarism is blowback, or the unintended consequences that have had long-term negative effects on the United States. And I just put together like a few notable blowback debacles. The first of which was notable was Nicaragua. In 1909, the United States backed conservative forces vying for control of the country. The U.S. actually occupied Nicaragua from 1912 until 1933 and installed the Chamorro family to run the country until the United States left the country due to the Depression and an insurgency that was led by Augusto Sandino. Now, if this name sounds familiar, it's because it is the name that was claimed by the communist Sandinista regime of the 70s. Sandino ruled until the United States installed the last dictator of Nicaragua, who was Anastasio Somoza, in 1936. Somoza was a brutal dictator and was overthrown by the Sandinistas in 1979. The result of this ultimately was that the entire region was plunged into war with El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala, which lasted, into the 80s. In 1990, ironically, Violeta Chamorro, the heir to the original Chamorro family that the United States installed, was returned to power in elections with the defeat of Daniel Ortega, the Sandinista president. Another notable blowback situation is Cuba. We took over bases in Cuba, basically kind of ran the place, and by 1926, United States companies owned 60% of the Cuban sugar industry, importing 95% of the crop. In 1940, General Batista seized power in a coup engineered by the United States in Florida, and the U.S. quickly recognized the government. And the era saw the complete domination of the Cuban economy by the United States. The Batista regime was extremely corrupt, and he ruled, ironically, until 1959, when he was overthrown by a young communist revolutionary named Fidel Castro. We don't need to go into the negative results of the Castro Revolution and its close ties to the Soviets, but we are living with the fallout of this to this day. Another notable blowback situation, Iran. The CIA deposed the democratically elected government of Mohammad Mossadegh in 1953 in a coup and installed the Shah. The Shah used his CIA-trained secret police, the SAVAK, to maintain this regime, and the Shah relied on United States support to stay in power until 1979. The reason for this coup ultimately was that Mossadegh was wanting to take control of the Iranian oil industry back from the American and British firms that were running it. The Shah was overthrown in 1979 by the Ayatollah Khomeini, as we know. And after that, the U.S. went on to support Iraq in the Iraq-Iran war, which claimed over 1 million lives. And our intervention in Iran has resulted in a terrible legacy, which has resulted in Iran being a major state sponsor of terrorism, which has damaged U.S. interests worldwide as they attempt to even the score. Iran is Hamas in the Gaza Strip, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and the Muslim Brotherhood in Libya, Egypt, and other places in the Middle East. Vietnam, we all know about that. Another war that was started on false pretenses, the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which was authorizing the United States to attack North Vietnam because of North Vietnamese gunboats that allegedly attacked 2 American destroyers. Recently declassified documents from the National Security Agency reveal that those attacks never happened. The results of that, as we know, were brutal. 54,000 American servicemen lost their lives in a war where there was no U.S. national interest at stake. Other fallout from that war was the Khmer Rouge takeover of Cambodia, which resulted in the murder of 2.5 million people, or 32% of the population of Cambodia in the killing fields. And we have the first Iraq War. Now this is interesting because this was another war that was UN sanctioned, that was based on false information. Saddam Hussein, as we know, was engaged in a border dispute with Kuwait. He was accusing them of siphoning oil from underneath the Iraq-Iran border. But what a lot of people don't know, and which was revealed in State Department cables that were released in the WikiLeaks affair, was that the United States ambassador, April Glaspie, had a meeting with Saddam Hussein in July 25th of 1990 to discuss this issue and to air out his issues. I mean, he wanted to get this thing taken care of, and he wasn't happy, and he was going to do whatever it took to resolve it. April Glaspie, our ambassador in Baghdad, told him, quote, and this is from the U.S. diplomatic cable, "We have no opinion on Arab conflicts like your border disagreement with Kuwait. I was in the American embassy in Kuwait during the late 60s, and the instruction we had during this period was that we should express no opinion on this issue, and that the issue is not associated with America. James Baker has directed our official spokesman to emphasize this instruction, and we hope that you can resolve the problem using any suitable methods through the Arab League or via President Mubarak, and we hope these issues are resolved quickly." Well, obviously, Saddam took this response as tacit approval for his invasion of Kuwait, which took place shortly thereafter on August 2nd of 1990. The second Iraq War. Now this has been going on 8.5 years, and it has incurred more than $800 billion in direct costs. But the ongoing medical treatment, replacement vehicles, and material will ultimately drive the cost of this over $4 trillion. That equates to about $3,000 a second, according to Christian Science Monitor. The human cost so far has been 4,500 of our best men and women killed and over 32,000 wounded. From 2003 to 2008, the U.S. debt zoomed from $5.7 trillion to $10.6 trillion. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up is to illustrate the human and the monetary cost of what we're doing. It was another UN-blessed war that was a continuation of the first Iraq War, and it was part of a grand plan to remake and dominate the Middle East. The result has been a democracy based on Sharia law, which makes women little more than animals, and has resulted in increased Iranian influence in Iraq and in the region. The Afghan War. This war was legitimately launched to attack al-Qaeda in response to the 9/11 attacks and eliminate their bases and capture or kill bin Laden. But for the killing of bin Laden, though, our goals were accomplished long ago. We continue in a war that will have no end at a cost of $1.3 trillion so far. It has resulted in 1,800 Americans killed and over 10,000 wounded. It is an unending guerrilla war. Afghanistan has been the graveyard of empires. It saw the destruction of Alexander the Great's empire, the British Empire, and the Russian Empire twice. Our rules of engagement, such as warning villagers prior to searches, U.S. forces can't engage the enemy if civilians are present, set us up to fail. In Pakistan, we took down our former ally, Musharraf, who had kept the country, under control in favor of a weak government that now has nuclear weapons. We regularly launch drone attacks into Pakistan, killing civilians and creating more recruits for the war against us. Next slide. Libya and Egypt, most recently. The United States withdrew its support for its government-approved dictators, and we attacked Libya at a cost of $1 billion where there was no U.S. interest at stake, supposedly for humanitarian and democratic reasons. We now learn that the Iranian client, the Muslim Brotherhood, and al-Qaeda elements have taken control of the political situation and direction in both countries. These nations have descended into chaos where they were previously ordered. Not only was this stupid, but think about it. What message does it send to other leaders of Mideastern nations who may be inclined to help us? We may turn on you at any moment, and then they're going to be dragging your bloody carcass through the streets. Osama bin Laden said that his aim was to bankrupt the United States and to bleed the U.S. dry in a war of attrition that would destroy our civil liberties. It could be argued that he has succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. According to a recent Pew Research Center report, only half of post-9/11, and this just came out, this Pew Research report just came out, only half of post-9/11 veterans feel the continued Iraq war has been worth fighting, and 44% felt the same way about the Iraq war. 1 in 10 Iraq and Afghan vets report problems adjusting to life at home after being in a combat zone, and 37% say that they suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Think about that. You've had about 2 million people cycle through Iraq and Afghanistan. Support for the previously referenced dictators and others worldwide like Egypt, Libya, Saudi Arabia, Guatemala, etc. have had very negative consequences for the United States. It puts to lie our promotion of democracy worldwide. Generally, our foreign intervention has been to install or prop up third world dictators that will secure U.S. military interests and business interests. Hence, Eisenhower's warning to us about the military-industrial complex. Now, I was going to introduce to you a veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan. He's kind of tied up in traffic right now. Hopefully he'll be here shortly. But when he gets here, I'll bring him up here. His name is Adam Patterson. And Adam Patterson is a veteran of both Iraq and Afghanistan. During his 4-year enlistment, he achieved the rank of sergeant and was awarded the Ranger Tab, the Bronze Star, Army Commendation Medal with Oak Leaf Cluster, Army Achievement Medal with 2 Oak Leaf Clusters, Army Good Conduct Medal, National Defense Service Medal, Army Service Ribbon, Combat Action Badge, Combat Parachutist Badge, Afghanistan Campaign Medal, Iraq Campaign Medal, and he served 3 tours in Iraq and 1 tour in Afghanistan. And he's the proud father of a new baby girl and is husband to his wife, Michelle. And he currently lives in Bethesda, Maryland. And he works as an operations manager for an engineering firm in Northern Virginia. So when he gets here, I'll bring him up here because he has some pretty interesting things to tell us. But when you add up all these military actions that the United States has been involved in, and you include ones that we don't most people don't even know about, like the Philippine War and the occupation of Haiti, etc. Like I said, we've been at war for most of the 20th and all of the 21st century, and most people don't realize that. The United States has currently got 4 ongoing wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, and Pakistan. Last year, U.S. Special Forces were deployed in over 70 countries around the world. And as if that weren't enough, Senator John McCain, who never saw a war that he didn't like, is now advocating for armed intervention in Syria. And he did this as recently as October 23rd. That should frighten anybody. If you study our continuous military buildup since World War II and the 737 military bases we have around the world, you will find an empire of bases is the concrete manifestation of our global hegemony, and many of the blowback-inducing wars we have conducted had as their real purpose sustaining and expanding this network. We don't think of these overseas deployments as empire. We don't. Most Americans don't even give them any thought at all until something truly shocking happens. But the people living next door to these bases and dealing with our soldiers and our contractors certainly think of them as imperial enclaves, just as the ancient Spaniards did with the Roman garrisons that they had, and 19th century India. They knew that they were under foreign occupation and empire. It is clear that we are in the late stages of this empire. If you've ever read the book 1984, you'll see that the government continually stoked fear of Emmanuel Goldstein, who was the bad guy that they used to justify the stealing of their liberty and the oppression of the people. We do the same thing. But now that bin Laden is dead, who will be our new Goldstein? Who will we direct our 2 minutes of hate to? And all this has been done, especially since 1990, to provoke foreign powers to act against us as a means of justifying the centralized Leviathan monstrosity that our government has become. They've exploited our fears since 9/11 and used these fears as a way for the general population to accept the rights-violating government expansionist domestic and foreign intrusions. 49% of Americans now believe that the federal government has become so large that it poses an immediate threat to our freedoms and our rights. In 2003, less than 30% of the people believed this. That's shocking. We're on the cusp of losing our empire our democracy and our republic for the sake of keeping our empire. And I believe that this is the Tea Party's biggest weakness. The unquestioning support of this empire. So here we have a president and his administration taking on the trappings and actions of a king. We have a revolution that we fought to be free of imperial rule, yet the American people seem to be content to sit by quietly while they become subjects of an empire instead of the citizens of a republic. The administration ignores the rule of law and rules by fiat. The Obama is becoming an American Caesar, and the Congress is playing the part of a toothless and willing Roman Senate. The President and his administration, as I said, have claimed the right to assassinate citizens that they deem to be a threat anywhere in the world. They have claimed the right to suspend habeas corpus and to hold citizens indefinitely without trial. This could happen to anyone here, like I said. In fact, it has been said that the Patriot Act was perfectly designed to kill political dissent. The war on terror is the new Cold War, and it is a war without end. So how do you ever have victory over a tactic? It has resulted in American citizens being searched without warrants. It has led to little old ladies being groped by TSA agents at airports. This is the face, the real life, real world face of what's happening to us. It has resulted in the government searching the library records of its citizens without warrants or probable cause from a judge. It has led recently to a pilot program in Tennessee where state police are allowed to just randomly stop drivers without cause to search their vehicles. Do you see how we are being conditioned to accept this violation of our liberty in the name of keeping us safe? Look what's happening. What's happening to us? This is not America. This is not the country I grew up in.
Amen.
I didn't grow up like this. This isn't the America that I know and love. The administration shreds the Constitution daily with impunity, and our republic is lessened each day. My fellow patriots, this much is clear. We are living in an empire, and like I said, many of us will find these statements uncomfortable, but most of us are children of the American empire. It's all we've ever known. It's how we were educated in our schools. It's how we've been socialized. We're like fish that doesn't know that it's in water. Sadly, our nation has turned into being a permanent warfare state. America, that was the shining city on the hill, has been turned into the shining gun turret on a hill. War is now normalized. It's nightly news, it's entertainment, it's infotainment. We have become more militarized. Each day we move closer to a national security state at home and an imperial policing power abroad. The misleadingly named Department of Defense serves, in fact, as a Ministry of Global Policing and has become a Department of War. And I fear that this is becoming central to our character, which pains my heart. This is not our normal. This is not our American spirit. As President Eisenhower warned, we have not been vigilant, and we have allowed our nation and our culture to be hijacked by a military-industrial complex. War provides jobs, profits, political payoffs, research funds, and forms of political and economic power that reach into every aspect of society and into every state and many communities. As a mode of public instruction, a state of permanent war leads its willing subjects to abide and sacrifice its values, ideology, and narratives in favor of fear and violence. Wars undermine civil liberties, public services, and public dissent. A hyper-militarized America has fueled violations of executive power, as we see daily from this administration. Now, don't misunderstand me. I am for a strong national defense. But there is a difference between defense and militarism that meddles in the affairs of other countries. We can lead without being attacking. I support our men and women under arms. What pains me is to see them used as fodder in a game of global dominion where American interests are not at stake. In the spirit of our founders, I wish America to be so strong that no one would ever dare attack us. And this is why the rattlesnake on the Gadsden flag and the porcupine were among our first national symbols. My friends, when you leave here today, if you remember nothing else, I want you to remember these three words: peace, liberty, and prosperity. If there is no peace, you will have no liberty. Your liberty will be stripped from you, a piece at a time, in the name of national security. It has been said, and it is true, that war is the health of the state. And if there is no peace, you will have no prosperity. The resources that would make plowshares will be confiscated and turned into swords in the name of national security. What I have just described is not the vision that our founding fathers had for us. Their vision for America, and the one that I remember, is the one of liberty, self-determination, limited government, and a free republic. James Madison said that if tyranny and oppression come to this land, it will be in the guise of fighting a foreign enemy. The founders did not see America as a colossus astride the world. In 1821, our nation sat between two empires, the British and the Spanish. The British Empire was the most powerful empire that the world had ever known. Most of South America was in open revolt against the Spanish throne, but America did not intervene on the side of the revolutionaries. America was envisioned to be a beacon of liberty through our example. Secretary of State John Quincy Adams said it best on his July 4th, 1821 speech to Congress upon reading the Declaration of Independence, which seems quaint today, but they used to do those kinds of things back then. And his thoughts ring just as true today, perhaps more so. and I would encourage everybody to go Google this, John Quincy Adams' Independence Day Address to Congress, 1821. Read the whole thing. But here's part of what he said about America. She has abstained from interference in the concerns of others, even when the conflict has been for the principles to which she clings. Whenever the standard of freedom and independence has been or shall be unfurled, there will her heart and benedictions be, as well as her prayers. But she goes not abroad in search of monsters to destroy. She is the well-wisher to freedom and independence of all. She is the champion and vindicator only of her own. She will recommend to the general cause by the countenance of her voice and the benign sympathy of her example. She well knows that by once enlisting under banners other than her own, were they even the banners of foreign independence, that she would involve herself beyond the power of extrication in all the wars of intrigue and interest and of individual avarice, envy, and ambition which assume the colors and usurp the standard of freedom. The fundamental maxims of her policy would insensibly change from liberty to force. The crown upon her brow would no longer beam with the ineffable splendor of freedom and independence, but in its stead would soon be substituted an imperial diadem, flashing the false and tarnished luster and murky radiance of dominion and power. She might become the dictatress of the world, but she would no longer be the master of her own spirit. America's glory is not in dominion, but liberty. Her march is the march of the mind. She has a spear and a shield, but the motto upon her shield is freedom, independence, and peace. Adam, why don't you come on up? Everybody, please give Adam.
Sorry, I've been in the car since 3:55. Oh my. Okay, before I get started, I feel I should give a few disclaimers that will serve as a sort of a preamble to my take on our current foreign policy of the United States. I'm not here to recite military and civilian deaths during the wars of the last 60 years. I'm not here to play your heartstrings with emotional appeals about dead women and children. I'm not here to speak about our nation's debt deficit and how it relates to the current and the proposed military engagements. I'd like to offer just one perspective from a veteran who is passionate about liberty and someone who sees our country becoming a gross perversion of what our founders gave their lives to establish. I'd like to give you some commentary on what I saw on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan, how it affects our standing in the world economically, diplomatically, as well as our national security. I don't expect everyone here to completely buy into my perspective, and I don't represent the military as a whole or a large portion of the military. I'm just one voice of less than 5% of Americans who have served in war, and hope my words and my experiences act as a counter to what you watch on your televisions or read in the paper. In 2001, at age 23, I carved a pretty good path for myself. I spent about 75% of the year as a legal researcher in Boston, making good money, even by today's standards. The other 25% I spent playing drums in a touring rock band. I never thought I'd develop such a love of country until I found myself openly thanking active duty military and veterans on the street and tearing up when I heard the national anthem. Did I really know what the words meant, or was I more enamored by the idea of what I thought America was and not what it had become in the past 100 years? In the years prior to 2001, I gravitated towards neoconservative talk radio shows, and I felt that most of the people outside that frequency weren't getting the real facts on the issues of the day. With a straight face, I would call myself a patriot and unashamedly toe the Republican Party line. So it was only natural to enlist after 9/11, knowing that our country was going to embark on a military campaign in response to the attacks. I bought into the fact that if we were to be safe, we had to deploy soldiers, sailors, and Marines with the lion's share of our military resources to the greater Middle East and beat the enemy into the ground. I successfully enlisted on a Ranger contract in the days following 9/11, and shortly thereafter I completed my training and deployed to Iraq for the first time. My first deployment consisted of a combat jump onto a desert landing strip west of Baghdad, where we conducted an airfield seizure in order to run follow-on missions in the western region of Iraq. Our unit conducted a mission to capture the Haditha Dam in order to prevent the Iraqi military from blowing up the dam to flood up the village of Haditha below and then blame it on the United States. This is when I first realized how, as a foreign military deployed to any country, controlling the message is almost impossible. Would you trust the Chinese leaflet that was dropped from a plane over what your family or community tell you? I found more times than not what we were trying to achieve, no matter how noble it was, would be turned upside down because we couldn't convince most people that our intentions were in their best interests. I returned to Iraq twice more and found the power vacuum that we created by taking the country's leadership out. Never did I imagine the overwhelming outside influence that would creep into the country. From the lot numbers on the improvised explosive devices we found, there was no doubt that they were Iranian. Iran found it in their best interest that Iraq remained destabilized. Whether it was due to border disputes going back to the Iraq-Iran War of the 80s, the oil reserves which lie under the ground in Iraq, or just to suppress a perceived threat that would arise from a strong rebuilt Iraq. I can't exactly pinpoint their motives, but what I do know is that they found an ally in those who took offense to the Americans occupying holy grounds. As a country in turmoil, Iraq could not control its borders, and any and all insurgents, as we called them, could travel into their country to defend Islamic land. These insurgents stopped at nothing to continually develop new and more innovative ways to kill Americans. Just as soon as you could defeat a tactic, they would develop another, and the death toll would spike again. This went on for years following the fall of the Ba'ath Party. We did our best to take out network after network of insurgency, but we learned fast that it only takes one person to place a car bomb and kill hundreds. We also learned that even with minimal numbers, recruiting poor, starving Iraqi youth that will do anything for the equivalent of 2 months' pay for the average Iraqi wasn't hard at all. They even went as far as drugging up kids to drive car bombs to populated areas or using mentally retarded Iraqis to wear bomb vests and told them to walk into marketplaces while insurgents would remotely detonate the explosive devices. These insurgents, no matter how brutal and calloused, had a cause they were rallying around. They would stop at nothing to get the Americans off Islamic soil. Their cause was as crystal clear in their minds as our cause of freeing up markets or defeating Obama carriers in our minds. I knew that our efforts to make Iraq or Afghanistan bastions of freedom and prosperity were in vain, but I drove on blinded by the mission and dedication to the men around me. I wasn't so much concerned with our actions or how the occupation fueled the insurgency. I was more concerned with doing my job as a part of a larger mission, and I really didn't have time for much else. My last deployment was to Afghanistan, and our mission was to kill capture number 1 and number 2, bin Laden and Zawahiri. We were stationed on the eastern border of Afghanistan, about an hour away from the Pakistani border. The biggest surprise I had after a few patrols was just how remote each village was from the other. It would sometimes take as long as a day to walk from village to village. Each village had a village elder that would be the point of contact and pass and receive information. What we found over time is that a lot of these village elders were paid off by the Taliban and returned for safety or food. The people in these villages didn't get their information like we do. They didn't have televisions, newspaper, or the internet. Their information came from the village elder, and a lot of times the village elder would get their information from the Taliban leaders. One interesting fact I discovered in the past year was that 90% of the population of Afghanistan has no idea that 9/11 even occurred. And those who have heard of it probably got their information from the Taliban, which probably was not a sympathetic view. So what do you think they believe is going on when some errant bomb hits a local school because NATO received intelligence that a building adjacent to the school was being used as a Taliban meeting place? Let's say 30 children are killed. How do you think this village will get the word on what happened and why? They will likely get all the information from the Taliban. Now, would you take up arms against a country or military that eliminated a whole generation from your village? We are supposedly in Afghanistan to defeat Al-Qaeda, but the CIA says that there are only 50 or so Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan. So what's going on now? Up to this point, we have given over 50 billion US tax dollars to the country of Afghanistan, the second most corrupt country in the world. If you think this money is being filtered to the if you don't think the money is being filtered to the Taliban, you are naive. Our troops currently in Afghanistan have a primary threat of improvised explosive devices in place by the Taliban. They are not being in place by the 50 or so Al-Qaeda. They are being in place by the 30,000 or so Taliban, based on how they control the message and how they get their information, numbers will only grow. And based on Congress's willingness to send their tax dollars to the second most corrupt country in the world, I don't see an end to this insanity. Just more of my friends coming back in boxes. I guess it wasn't until about 2008 I started growing weary of the wars and feared watching news reports of recently killed soldiers, knowing there was a chance that I served alongside a fallen soldier, and worse yet, that I knew their families as well. It didn't seem right that the message pumped out by the administration through the alphabet networks was that these men and women serving overseas were protecting our freedoms, and that we needed to stay the course while at the same time making excuses as to why our borders were left completely open. It seemed that we were spending more time and effort protecting the Shias from the Sunnis by building barriers around their neighborhoods than defending our nation. We were busy helping write the Constitution of Iraq only to trample on our own. We were pumping taxpayer dollars into these forced democracies to build back up what we had torn down through multiple bombing campaigns, while the U.S. cities like Detroit turned into the set of a Mad Max movie. I started questioning my views on U.S. foreign policy and the sentiment as expressed by traditional media outlets. Was I as conservative as I thought I was? I knew damn well I wasn't a modern-day liberal. Why did I believe less and less of what I was saying as I continued to defend our foreign policy? When nothing else made sense, I turned towards our founders for the answers. I learned about John Locke and natural rights and his influence on the founders as they established the parameters of our Constitution. This changed my view of torture in Guantanamo. I learned about non-interventionists and entangling alliances from George Washington, Thomas Paine, and Thomas Jefferson. This changed my view on the 17 UN resolutions that played a part in justifying us invading Iraq, the ISAF NATO command in Afghanistan, and our military alliance with Israel. The more and more I learned about the original idea that was America, the more I shed my neoconservative armor. There is a difference between safety and freedom, and it seems that one is given at the expense of another. I will always choose freedom over safety, or the illusion of safety that we have today. My hope is that the United States can be an example for the world of what a nation looks like where there is maximum freedom, peace, and prosperity. This cannot be achieved through the Patriot Act, the Tomahawk missile, the Predator drones, or soaking the sands of the Middle East with the blood of the best of my generation. The men I served with were the cream of the crop. Not just fantastic soldiers, but our nation's finest men. Of course, there are always exceptions, but especially the fraternity of men who joined immediately after 9/11 were unmatched in their dedication and professionalism. I think we need to have the most powerful military in the world, but a military acting within the confines of the Constitution, which clearly spells out that the primary function of government is to provide for national defense. Not of South Korea or Germany, but of the United States. There is a huge difference between militarism and defense. And unfortunately, right now, we have 0% defense and 100% militarism. Thank you very much.
You know, in closing, I will just say there's a scene in Shakespeare's Julius Caesar where Cassius, who is a nobleman, turns to his friend Brutus and says, "The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings." Cassius was trying to persuade Brutus that in the best interests of the public, Julius Caesar must be stopped from becoming the monarch of Rome. Brutus is aware of his friend's intentions, but is torn between the love of his friend Caesar and his duty to the Republic. Cassius continues to remind Brutus that Caesar is just a man and not a god, and that they are equal men to Caesar. They were both born equally free, so why would they suddenly have to bow to another man? The President of the United States should not have and was not designed to have the power of a king. We don't have to be underlings. We have it within our power to stand up and reclaim our republic. It is time to return to the republic and dismantle the empire and engage the world with diplomacy, free commerce, and leadership by example. Regardless of whether you agree with what I've said or not, shouldn't we ask ourselves, when are we going to get back to living according to the Constitution and being good stewards of the awesome inheritance that was given to us by our founders? God bless you all. God bless you.